Hello, friends. I know it's been a little bit since you've seen me, a couple weeks at least. Today, I'd like to introduce you to a new, not scheduled, irregularly programmed series on my channel that I'm going to be calling The Red Room, which is why there's a very pale and insignificant red glow on my face that I really wish I could make cover the whole room, except it's daytime when I have to film this. The Red Room is going to be a series of slightly more serious, but mostly positive videos about things that I learned in the Red Room. And you might be asking, where is that? What does that mean? What the fuck are you talking about? And I understand. The Red Room was a name that my friends and I affectionately coined for my old room at my mom's house before I moved to my house that I live in here and which I film in now. I had this light that could change colors when you pressed a button, and my room was so small that I could fill the entire room with any color that I wanted and really set a vibe with this light, because like all other queer teenagers, I had a color changing light in my room and used it extensively only when I had friends over. And so oftentimes I would make the entire room just lit up with that light. In fact, for a long time, I didn't have another brighter light to use. And that one was more dim than this one, which you can barely see on my face. And so I started using the different colors to set different vibes on purpose. I would use blue for hanging out with friends. I would use green never because it hurt my eyes. I would use yellow to simulate natural light for a situation where I had to do something more serious. I started interpreting those things as just mood setters for my room and for my life as it existed in that room. Over time, my friends and I encountered a number of emotional problems, both for ourselves, in smaller subgroups, or for our entire group of friends as a whole. And as we encountered those issues, we wanted to squash them out and talk about them. And because of the availability of my various friends' living situations at the time, the best place for people to meet up was usually my room at my house, because my family always guaranteed us privacy whenever I was in my room with the door closed. And so, as we began to discuss these more serious issues and become adults in our own right before I moved out of that house, we began to use the color red on the light as a signifier that we were talking about something serious, whether that be romantic or sexual, or whether it be depressing and crushing or sobering and real. And even though it is admittedly very cheesy to continue that trend on into my independent adulthood with my partner, I tend to still want to use the red light as a signifier of talking about my emotions and talking about things that have been important to me. And through a series of events that you may or may not hear about at some point, I began to use the red light primarily as a signifier of progress, of analyzing the past, the present, and thinking about the future in a way that signifies personal growth. And so, in this small series, however short, long, consistent, inconsistent it may end up being, I will be discussing with you some of the things that I learned in the Red Room. Now, with that said, not every episode of this series, or maybe not even any of them, are going to be filmed in the dark with the red light on my face and stuff, because I don't think it's necessary, at least for now. It's just a theme. It's a vibe. It's a feeling. Today's episode is going to be about the intersection between queerness and friendships, and how the way that you go about being friends with people can be impacted by your identities, both individually and the ones you share with each other. Now, a little disclaimer. All of this is just me riffing on my own experiences, right? I'm not every person, I'm not every queer person, I'm not every trans person, and so I don't know every single thing about how people interact and all that. I'm not I don't study that formally. It's all just kind of my experience. But one of the most important periods of time that I experienced in the Red Room originally was regarding some conflict between friends. And while that was a very jarring and heartfelt experience to work through with the people closest to me, I do think that one of the biggest things I got out of it was learning about how our identities impact our friendships, And while that was not the topic of any of our discourse at most points, it was very interesting, and it's something that I've spoken to my friends about at length. Something that I've really put a lot of thought into. And so I wanted to try and condense some of those lessons and some of those things that I've observed into a video here for you guys to enjoy. Another note is that this video is primarily for my LGBT viewers. Now, obviously, there is nothing stopping you from watching this, and in fact, I encourage you to watch this if you are not one of my LGBT viewers, because I just think this is an interesting topic, and I would love to hear the thoughts on it from someone who doesn't have the same experience, or maybe has the same experience without being LGBT. I will also be using the terms LGBT and queer interchangeably. I know some people are not comfortable with the usage of the word queer. Rest assured, you know I'm trans, and so I feel like I can say it. But if you disagree with the usage of the word queer, feel free to let me know in the comments about the fact that you do and why, because I think that's a very interesting conversation. I will be continuing to use it, at least for this video, but if you feel there's a reason that I shouldn't be, please inform me. So, my first topic. I think that as an LGBT person, it's easier to make friends and to maintain being friends with people when those people are also LGBT. In my experience, it's night and day. Both before and after I knew that I was bisexual, which was the first not cis-het identity that I realized that I had, I didn't find very much comfort in my friends who were cis-het. What do you know? And now there would be exceptions to that at the time, but over time those friends ended up coming out to me in various ways that I will not obviously detail because it's not important, but the people that never ended up being queer are the people that I felt less close to looking back, in retrospect. And while all of the people I've been close to in my life have been important to me in one way or the other, or in multiple ways, sometimes both good and bad from the same person, I do feel like the people who have impacted me the most have been the people who are also LGBT and the people who I share some identity characteristics with. And I feel like one of the biggest reasons that that's the case is that there's a certain vulnerability in sharing your truest self with someone. And that's sort of a cheesy way to put it, I guess. But I feel like there's a version of every LGBT person that they show to cis-het people. And whether that is being closeted and feeling like you have to act like you're the same as the cis-het people in whatever various ways, or whether that's toning down your expression of yourself and your identity, your wants and your needs, to fit into a bubble of people who are, I don't know, a member of a heteronormative society. There's plenty of other ways as well that can manifest for people. I myself feel like I am fairly open and unabashed about my identity with people who don't share it, or don't share in being LGBT. I feel like I pose myself as sort of a mediator and an informant, someone who can take criticism that may be unfounded for the sake of education. And that's one of my biggest reasons for making videos about LGBT issues on this channel, actually, is because I would like to inform my primarily gaming-focused audience, who I assume are, judging by the demographics, primarily young men, about my experience having been a young man and growing into the person that I am today. And so to circle back, I feel like my friendships with people are definitely affected by our identities. Because when you're gay, again, umbrella term, but when you're gay and you know someone else is gay, or you mind meld with them. You what's the Vulcan thing where you put your hand on their head? You do that across the room with someone and you figure out that they're queer. Once you know, you know. And there's no way that you can let that not affect your interactions with someone. I have never met anybody other than a select, less than a handful of cis gay people who haven't interacted with me more positively because we find out that we're on common ground being queer. And I think that that's really important. I think that that's what should be embodied when people talk about an LGBT community. There are some places on the internet that attempt to be an LGBT community. There are various subreddits for trans people or being LGBT in general, being gay, being whatever. There are websites, both dating apps and forums and social media that are focused on queer people expressing themselves to each other freely. And I think that that's really good. If there are people that find solace and find safety and comfort in those spaces, then they should be given those spaces. But I personally am not one of those people. I do not seek out LGBT spaces online or really in person, outside of who I curate into my life by way of being friends and getting closer or less close to certain people. I don't personally find any necessary comfort in specifically queer spaces, and I haven't my whole life. Even in high school and college, the GSA was never a place I wanted to be. In fact, it was the last place I wanted to be. And I can never really say for sure why, and that's not the scope of this video. But I do feel like, especially for me, being someone who doesn't cling onto or latch onto queer spaces, I feel like it's very important to recognize the role that shared queerness plays in my life and in my relationships. And so this brings me sort of to my next point, that the functional day-to-day, the goings-on in a relationship, and in this case I'm talking about friendship, is affected by shared identity characteristics between individuals or amongst a group. I've spent the last 5 or 6 years of my life in the same friend group, and it consists of mostly the same people today that it did when I was in high school and I met these people who were already in this group together since childhood. I'm very fortunate to have found a group of people by chance who ended up liking me and wanting me to be their friend, and it's resulted in some of the biggest emotional losses and the biggest emotional gains in my life. And even now as an adult, I'm almost 22 years old, I still find that these people are the closest people in my life, and that includes my partner, who's also a member of this group. Now, when I talk about a friend group, this group has always fluctuated between, I'd say, 8 to 15 people. Never really gone outside of that range. It's never been any less, it's never been any more. And usually when it's been that many people, certain people end up being cut out or left behind or leaving for various personal reasons that come about inevitably when you have a lot of people trying to be friends with each other. And again, that's kind of outside the scope of this video, although it is another Red Room video I would like to make soon in the future. But the point is that one of the biggest things that drew those people to me when I joined their group and, became one of these people's friends was the fact that I was gay and trans, bisexual specifically, and trans. And at the time I didn't know that I was non-binary, and that's a whole other journey, I guess. I hate the word journey, but anyway. Having the vulnerability in my senior year of high school to tell these people about how I was trans and about how that experience worked for me as someone who looked, sounded, and acted like a guy, it was a very, like I said, vulnerable moment for me. It was me exposing part of myself that most people didn't really get to see just by chance, because I didn't know how to work myself into my daily life yet. I only knew how to live as the me that had been raised by a heteronormative and cis-centric society. And I find that finding people who you can be that self with and sort of workshop your own personality with is an extremely important experience as a queer person, especially one who's young or who has just come out. Now, further into my adulthood, I kind of fast-track those steps with other people who are similarly comfortable. I'm very comfortable in my identity as a trans feminine non-binary person, and when I meet another trans person especially who is equally comfortable with themselves and knows how to interact with other queer people, I find that we skip a lot of the steps and we end up being really good friends right off the bat because we've already communicate, either verbally or non-verbally, the experiences that we've had learning how to be queer around other queer people and how to create that comfort and personalize that comfort by way of setting boundaries and talking about emotions, communication. And I'm not saying that cis-het people can't do that. But I think that there is an important point to the fact that when queer people get together, we tend to, although not always, have really good communication, have a really certain idea of what we want, unless we're having an unrelated crisis in our lives that affects that. And we tend to know how to negotiate a relationship with new people very well, just off the bat. And I find that, some of that can come from trauma. And that's not something I'll be discussing here. But if you know, you know. And some of that can come from past positive experiences as well. You can still learn from an experience while having it be positive. You can still have a net gain in every corner. And meeting new people can be a bonus, where you already know what to do because of the positive experiences you've had in your life. But regardless of where it comes from, part of the queer experience as an umbrella term and as a larger concept, I feel, is knowing how to make friends. And specifically knowing how to make friends with other queer people. But this whole thing is talking about friendships, and I think that my third and final biggest point that I'd like to make is that amongst queer friends, in a group especially, the lines between platonic friendship and romantic or sexual relationships tend to be blurred and sort of strewn about, tangled up like yarn. And that might sound unhealthy, and that's because sometimes it is. I find that occasionally it can be harmful to feel like you can just have casual sex with your friends, or feel like the attractiveness that you feel coming from another person in your mutual group of friends is more than that for you when you can't actually manifest that into a standard romantic relationship. And now there is no such thing as a standard, right? When I say standard, again, that all ties back into heteronormativity and the sort of normal culture that is perpetuated by primarily non-queer people, cis-het people in society doing their thing. I think I've experienced a lot more loss than gain from the fact that those lines are blurred in a queer group of friends. I won't be going into the specifics in this video, both to preserve the privacy of others in my life, but also because I just kind of don't feel like it right now without having written notes beforehand. Queerness facilitates friendship. And like I've been saying for the past however many minutes, it's easier to make and maintain friendships when everybody involved shares their identity with each other, both sharing your own openly and also having the same characteristics as someone else, perhaps. And I feel like there are some really good opportunities where that can facilitate romantic relationships or very serious long-term best friend, platonic kind of relationships. You can foster something really amazing with people by sharing how you feel and who you are with them as soon as you feel comfortable, and making other people feel equally comfortable to do the same, especially people who don't yet know everything about themselves, although, it's debatable whether you can. I feel like dynamically setting your boundaries with people is an extremely important part of communicating with them, and an extremely important part of any type of long-term personal relationship. And it's something that I never learned from cis-het people or cis-het society. My queer friends taught me how to be a good friend, how to be a good partner, how to be a good person. Not solely, but primarily. So I learned it from these people, and that is anecdotal. That is just my experience, but I've heard the same or similar from so many other people, whether it be from an ex who taught them a lot of good things, or some friends that maybe they don't talk to anymore, or maybe they still do, but who did a lot of good. And I don't mean to paint straight people in a negative light. It's funny too, don't get me wrong, but I don't mean to do that definitively, because there is no reason to do so, right? People are people, and they will act as they will. But I find that LGBTQ community or culture that is lauded over by straight people as existing mostly manifests in personal relationships that are not broadcast entirely to the public. And I feel like it creates sort of a network of people who know each other and love each other and care about each other in ways that they were not exposed to prior to realizing their queer identities and sharing those with other similar people. And so is this unique? No. Not to me and my friends, not to me personally, not to queer people at all. Anyone can have the experiences that I've listed here. And I think that's an important thing to dwell on. Anybody can experience these same things and foster great friendships with each other. And I wish that on everybody good in the world. But in my life, it's been much easier to relate to people and create those experiences and those friendships when we are all queer. And I hope that you feel the same if you are one of my LGBT viewers, because I wish this positive experience on everyone. And I think that the moral, I guess, if I want to create one, of today's episode of The Red Room is that if you have not yet found these positive experiences and these good people for yourself, and if it might feel like it's impossible to do so and like you will never find that true partnership, regardless of the type of that relationship, you can. And if you're queer and you feel like your identity gets in the way of your relationships, I think it's worthwhile to analyze those relationships. Talk to those people. Communicate with yourself and use that to communicate with others. Think about what fulfillment you're getting. You know, there's a concept in being trans of gender euphoria as an adverse and opposite concept to gender dysphoria, which I think we're all familiar with. And it's, that's specifically about trans people and gender identity. And I think that that's very important, but I think you can expand that concept of euphoria out to the other parts of your identity. If you do not feel fulfilled and celebrated in your life, and I don't mean literally, woohoo, go you, you're gay, that's not necessary. It's fun, but it's not necessary, right? I mean, if you don't feel emotionally fulfilled in the relationships that you have in a way that satisfies feeling certain in your identity, seek that for yourself. Manifest that, create that, because it is one of the most fulfilling things in the world. And I might say that it's saved my life more than once. So that concludes today's episode of The Red Room. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like, leave a comment, feel free to subscribe to the channel for hopefully more coming soon. I'm really excited to be able to share my personal experiences with you guys with this as a medium. And I know I'm being a little fourth wall breaking here by talking about the YouTuber process while in the first episode of my new series or show. But I want you guys to know that this is always changing, and there's a reason that sometimes I don't make videos on time, or sometimes I don't have anything particularly interesting to talk about. It's because of the stresses of day-to-day life and the relationships that I've been mentioning this whole time. But I think that it's important to share that with you guys, and if I'm going to foster a community here like you have all seemed to be very welcoming to, if that makes sense, it probably doesn't, then I'm going to have to communicate with you, just like I would communicate with any friends that I make in real life. And so this is that first step. If you enjoy The Red Room, there will be a playlist linked somewhere on this video, probably in a card up there? I think it's up there. And you can view the other episodes once they exist. I hope you have a great day. I hope you learned something. And let me know how you feel. Have a good one.